Welcome to the Recover You podcast. I'm Kylene.
And I'm Patrick.
We are a couple in recovery
from sex addiction
and betrayal trauma. Together, we share our story to encourage you on your journey. It's here that we talk about sex addiction, betrayal trauma, mental, emotional, and physical health, faith, and anything and everything needed to recover you to your most authentic self that God created you to be. Well, welcome everyone to another episode of Recover You. Patrick and I are super excited today to have some very special guests on. I'm just going to do a quick intro for Rodney and Traci Wright. They are passionate about helping others move towards health. They work for Pure Desire Ministries, and they travel the world sharing their personal journey of recovery and hope based on 30 plus years of experience as speakers, pastors, and counselors. They facilitate training conferences on how to raise sexually healthy kids, have raised 3 children, and have also authored the book, How to Talk to Your Kids About Sex. So we will definitely put a link to that in the show notes, but we are so thankful that you have taken some time today to join us. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you, Kylene and Patrick. It's really great to be here with you guys.
We are really looking forward to kind of diving into this topic of how to talk to your kids. I think it's really, really, really important and something a lot of us shy away from. We feel really uncomfortable around the topic, and particularly with our children, and maybe we weren't really raised with it in a healthy way in our childhoods. And so really looking forward to this specifically today. But can we just start with, how did you get into this? Share a little bit about your story. Typically when people author a book like that, it's because we have our own journeys, right? So tell us a little bit about you guys and how this came to be.
Yeah, great. Well, this definitely wasn't my childhood dream at 12 at the church youth camp. I got a vision of being a sexual missionary. You know what I mean? It definitely didn't start there. But it's funny to see that's kind of where it's taken us, just to try to be one of thousands of healthy voices in the faith community, just kind of reclaiming the goodness of our God-given sexuality. And so Traci and I have been married for 35 years on August 19th.
Monday.
So Monday, just coming around the corner. We
Happy anniversary.
Thank you.
Thank you.
3 kids and 2 grandkids. And so we're just thrilled that we can do this. You know, the book really came out of our own journey, because for me, growing up in the faith community, Kylene and Patrick, I didn't really have any framework, or I didn't really have any context of knowing how to think, how to understand my sexual feelings, my sexual thoughts, and then how to manage my sexual behavior in healthy ways, other than it's bad and don't have sex. That was kind of the education that I got. And so, I grew up thinking that all my sexual feelings were lust and evil. And ever since I was 11, just fighting the demon, whatever that is, instead of this is a normal part of your adolescent development. Here's what's good about your body. Here's what's amazing of how God made you. And now here's how to manage it in healthy ways. So it really, this for me came out of just my own journey of exposure to pornography as a kid. In fact, that's always a great question we like to ask. When were you first exposed? Because that's about all of us, exposure-wise. We were all exposed at some time. But I just needed help. And so I was raised in a Christian community. My father was a minister. Back in the 70s, I like to say my dad was a cross between Billy Graham, Ronald Reagan, and 10% John Wayne. That was my dad, So I didn't think this guy ever made a mistake. He pastored a church of about 1,000 in the 70s. And so when I was a kid navigating pornography, masturbation questions, I just didn't feel safe to go to him and say, Dad, how do I navigate this? And so that just really set a lot of shame for me. And it kind of became a secret. And then it was confessing to my brother, saying that, hey, confession is good, asking God to help me. So I wasn't a kid that walked away from faith. I was a kid very anchored in my faith, praying, asking God to help me, seeking, crying. I was trying to hit and pull all the religious buttons and pull all the levers to change, but I wasn't transforming. I thought that if I had a sexual problem, I could get married because that's the license to have sex, right? Sexual touch in marriage, yay, So I thought that marriage would fix this problem, and so, like we say, marriage doesn't fix your problems. It just reveals more of the health or the state it finds you in. If you're healthy, it reveals your health. And if you're unhealthy, marriage reveals your unhealth. So it didn't change. And I really realized a few years into marriage, a couple kids, minister, young youth pastor. And I said, at this time, I'm confessing to my brother and my dad. So it's not, I feel like I just got to get over the hump here if I can just do it. And I wasn't transforming. And I just said, God, could you lead me to people and resources that could help me? I had a lot of compassionate people around me, but I knew I just didn't have some competent resources. And it was a drummer in our church where we attended in Portland, Oregon, almost 30 years ago. And he was a sexual trauma assessment treatment therapist.
Wow.
And I'm a Pentecostal, raised up in that framework. So we definitely don't go to those folks, Patrick and Kylene. Those are for messed up people. That's what I'm thinking in my head. God, only people that go there are the ones that are messed up. And I feel like the whole Trinity said it once, and that's you, Rodney. But we fully anticipated you, and we've got people and resources. Well, because of my faith background, I just went in on Tuesday, hoping to be fixed by Friday, so I look good on Sunday. But Patrick, you got a big smile on your face. You know what I'm talking about. I just wanted the Jesus magic, just the instant character change. And my therapist said, Rod, you got a brain issue, not just a moral issue. And we want to talk to you about the neuroscience of the brain and how pornography has made neuro connections in your brain, that neurons have connected into synapses, and there's like a rut in your brain. So like subconsciously, you fall into this as a way of coping. And we're going to now learn how to identify your pattern of behavior. So we went through Patrick Carnes' material, and we're going to learn how to retrain the brain, neuroplasticity. We're going to create new neurons to fire off and new synapses. And so this whole thing of neuroplasticity and understanding how your brain works. And so for me, I took on this whole concept of holistic spirituality. I didn't know how to integrate God in my thinking, my sexuality, or my traumas that I had as a young kid. So this became obviously a coping mechanism. And so the word for neuroplasticity in the Bible is repentance. The Greek word is metanoia, which means changing how you think. So anyway, that's kind of a long introduction to this, but I always thought repentance was just crying and promising God you'll never do it again, and that you're really, really sorry. Mm-hmm. And I realized that that's not repentance. That's just godly sorrow, which is good and healthy. But repentance is when you identify a thinking error and then you replace it with the truth. And sometimes we need help in repenting, right? How do I think differently? Self, God, and others. So that started a 3-year relationship with my therapist. And disclosure came about 6 months into that process, which was heartbreaking for Traci. And that's a whole nother episode someday, just about, what I was getting freedom. And she was the one that was really pained by all that. Long story short, out of that recovery journey about 11 years ago, we found Pure Desire, brought him to our church. And then this in my heart was like, what if young Rodney or young Traci always had a healthier framework, or their parents were healthier, to give them a framework to see, think, understand about human sexuality. So that's the book, how to talk with your kids, not necessarily to your kids, about this conversation.
Thank you for sharing that. Traci, I'm curious, like a lot of times for women, when they go through the discovery and disclosure, a lot of times our history of exposure was dramatically different than what our spouses was. Did you have like a really, I want to say almost like innocent childhood where you really weren't exposed? Was this super shocking to you? Or did you also have some exposure when you were young? Did you have conversations with your parents about things like this?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I do work with a lot of spouses too as a clinician for Pure Desire. And that is often the case, as it was with me. I just talked to someone this week, and our stories, I can go back, even though it's been 26, 27 years ago, and my heart instantly can connect to someone's story, that sorority that we didn't sign up for piece. And I grew up also conservative. We had a very similar background, but Rodney will say, him disclosing to me was like saying Mother Teresa smokes crack. I was like, that doesn't match anything I know, right? I felt like we had a connected relationship, and I know Rodney pretty well. So, right, that compartmentalized part. And now I know, and I understand addiction better, and I know the full picture of that. Certainly that takes time to understand, not just hear, but for our heart to heal and to understand. So it wasn't something. I was a good rule follower girl, and just following the rules, and okay, we get married and everything's going to be great, and 3 kids in, and that's becomes part of our story, and a huge amount of trauma, of course, and those PTSD symptoms that are common. But it was a long time ago, so really there wasn't a lot of support the way that there is now. Mm-hmm. And we really would just share with people when they came in our path, and we both felt comfortable with it. And, we got the levels of support that we could. But always Rodney had that desire to help parents and help young kids. And in helping parents, people would realize that they needed that support for themselves if they were in denial, or right? Because we want to pass on something good, but sometimes we're not. It's too scary to look at ourselves first. So I saw that in him. And then as we moved from being pastors into working for Pure Desire, that naturally flowed into a role that we could both write the book together with a lot of our own stories with our kids, and how we didn't do it well and how we tried to do it well, and all that. So that's kind of how that became a part of what we do. And we do a lot of different things for Pure Desire, but this is a really central piece, and that we've been connected with over the last 6 years.
Yeah. So the parents listening to this podcast today, we have 10 principles that we're going to talk through today, but you're not going to have time to make all the mistakes in parenting. So Rodney and Traci wrote down some of ours.
Yeah.
We've already paid the dumb tax. And so we're trying to pay those forward so you guys can say, hey, yeah, I remember Rodney and Traci said this, let's go a different route here,
Well, I think that's I don't want to say the silver lining of like the pain we go through, but it is like the ability to turn around and help people avoid some of the mistakes that maybe we made along the way. And so I'm so glad you shared like how you got into sharing this type of work, because that was one of my questions, was like when couples go through this, so many people still don't want to talk about it publicly. You guys not only talk about it publicly, you're on the Pure Desire podcast, you're on the Pure Desire team, you wrote a book, so it's obviously a big mission for you to help and support other people. And so I'm so glad to see that, because like you mentioned off air, I don't think there's enough resources out there. Still not enough resources out there. So the more people are willing to talk about it and share about it, we're thrilled that you're part of that. So you mentioned a little bit about the mistakes that parents make. Can you maybe share what are some of the biggest commonalities you see with how we talk to our kids or don't talk to our kids maybe about this topic?
Well, there's a principle. I'll let Traci kind of unpack it, but I used to think I had to get all the information out at once whenever the kid was coming into puberty, right? So I have a funny story where my youngest boy says, with his friends coming over to the house, whatever you guys do, don't ask my dad about puberty. Don't ask him. He's like, woo. It's like we had to sit there for an hour dissertation. So, not the give him the quote about the 1 minute talk, Trace.
Right. Not the 100-minute conversation, but 101-minute conversations is a quote that we heard and picked up on. And, really that is changing. And I think young parents now, different than our generation, younger parents know that the exposure is out there with the phones and technology. It is just very accessible and not very hard to find. It's coming after you, in fact. So I think people are more aware that we need to start younger. They don't always know how or what that sounds like. So that's, sometimes what we love to help them with. But just starting from when they're verbal, teaching those boundaries and anatomy and beginning the conversations is kind of like, oh yeah, we talk about this in our family. So when, not if, but when there is some type of exposure, whatever that is, they've already kind of set that groundwork. And we've seen that working a lot with parents with younger kids of just, they're now more in tune with that. They've talked about some things and their kids are coming to them, right, whether it's sexual or not. If there's something that like, ooh, I feel kind of yucky about this, where our natural inclination is something's wrong with this. I probably did something wrong and I'm going to hide. I mean, that really is most young people's reaction to being exposed to something with pornography. They don't quite know what to do with that, but they don't know who's safe to go to. So I think, first of all, setting that up, that we are the safe people, being able to talk to them. Sometimes we use the terminology of like, I wish my parents could have talked to me about this when I was growing up, or I had these questions, and when you have these questions, I hope you could come to me, or, like if there's an aunt or a close, somebody in their life, I hope that you can come and talk more with all of these safe people in your life about this.
So the mistake is just thinking I'm going to wait till middle school. And the answer would be no, start as they're very young, 100-minute conversations all through their age and stage of development.
I love that. That's so smart. It's creating that foundation of safety by just basically what you're talking about is basically keeping the door open all the time.
Right. It takes a little intentionality, right? You're prepared. You're kind of watching for that, because there's these moments that some kids are just going to ask the question, and other kids, they won't ask anything. It doesn't mean they don't have the question, but you're kind of with intentionality watching for those moments where you can ask them some good questions, or, hey, what do you think about that? Or here's kind of what I've learned.
Yeah, I know when, obviously when I was discovered, our son was 16, and I had never really had a good conversation with him. There was, a bunch of, obviously I was in my own thing, but Kylene had tried at times to talk to him, and I think had done a good job. But, once I was discovered, then my PhD program that I was going through, I ended up directing it at him. And I think as well-intentioned as I was, in some ways, I think it was a lot for him to take in. And, at 16 and stuff like that, I think it ultimately turned out good because he's a good kid, and I think he understands nuance. But I know there were some times through my own journey of talking to him through my own pain and really trying to be like, I've got to prevent this from happening to him as well, that I think it was really a lot for him to take on. So I think you don't want to give a 16-year-old a lifetime of instruction in 6 months. It's too much as he's learning about what his dad did to his family, and it was really painful, and there were some really extremely painful moments. I think it's turned out okay, but so
a lot to sort out for a teenager. A lot
it really
to
is.
Sort out.
Yeah, it really, he's worried about his parents' relationship, and then we're sitting down, and he's like, "Who's Ted Roberts, and why was he flying in Vietnam?" And and all of these things and stuff like
his
that.
His dad going to Vietnam. Is Vietnam War still on? What's going on?
Right, yeah. So it was just a lot. You mentioned 10 principles that you talk through. Can you kind of go through those for us and let the audience know what those are?
Yeah, you bet. I'll do the first 5 and then let Traci do the last 5. But the first one is just as a parent, we talk about pursuing your personal health. So if you're the parent at a young age, in fact, we like to get high schoolers into our parent training. So they're starting to pursue health before they're even engaged or married, right? So that's great. So the best gift you give your kids is learning how to love yourself well. So if you never got instructions on sexuality, or you have any kind of negative sexual history, abuse, addiction, if you have abandonment, or just any aspect of your sexual history is like negative and you're trying to outrun it, or affairs or betrayed partner, or any betrayed partner, go get help. Healthy people seek help, and seeking help is never a sign of our weakness. It's a sign of our wisdom. And so there are a lot of wonderful resources that are out there now where you can say, hey, I'm in the pattern here and I'm not doing well, or I can't even talk to anyone about this. Not you have to get on a podcast and share to the whole world. But it's nice not to live with secrets, and you say, hey, there's genuine people in my life that know my story, and I'm not trapped by it any longer. So own your story, I would simply say, is a great thing for your kids. And I had sobriety for a season, but I had a ton of shame in my story. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. I didn't fully own it. And that's where recovery groups really helped me 11 years ago. And I wish I would have found the recovery movement a lot sooner. The second one is educate yourself. Second principle. How do we come to learn about sex? Typically, that's our family, our faith community, our culture. And all of those can be positive or negative. But unfortunately, culture has been the sex educator for our kids. And so, just stepping back and saying, okay, how can the faith community be healthier? And I think this is one way, by bringing people in to be voices in faith communities, to educate and to instruct. And also just how can our family be healthier? What was healthy about the family I grew up? Number 3, practice communication. This is normally when I make Traci read all these sexual terms in our trainings. And it's my favorite part because I love it. But because sometimes we only have heard sexual language in derogatory ways. And we spoke about that a little bit. And that's unfortunate. They're not evil words: penis, masturbation, vagina. These aren't evil terms, erection. They're just sexual terms. But unfortunately, we feel so awkward and uncomfortable when people bring those up because we've never heard them in a healthy context. And then number 4, which is probably the most important one, I would say, is foster connection. Our greatest human need isn't orgasm or sexuality, in the sense of sex, I should say, not sexuality, but sex, intercourse. Our greatest need is connection, to be known and seen and loved, and someone can share my thoughts and feelings with and be validated. So if you can teach your kid how to show up and be seen and loved, and they can share their emotions and share what's going on, man, you're fostering something really, really great, because that's true intimacy. You know, that term into me, you see, right? Intimate relationships, that's really important. And then number 5 is just be ready at any time. Questions can come, and you want to be ready for them. And just a quick story here, and then I'll let Traci take the last 5. But putting our little son to bed one day, 5 years old, in his Buzz Lightyear pajamas, if you remember those days, Patrick, he says to me, "Hey, Daddy, how come my penis gets hard?" You know, well, I couldn't say that to my dad when I was 16, let alone 5, right? He knew what to call his anatomy, and he felt safe to talk to his dad. How many think that's a win right there, right? That's exactly where questions should happen. Now, I didn't go upstairs saying, "Traci, I hope he asked me the question about erection. I've been thinking about that, and this would be a wonderful time to, extend some truth his way." But I just said, this is one of our 1-minute conversations. That's how God made your body. I connected that to the divine. That's how God made your body. And that happens to your dad and every other man. And then I said, in the morning, it means you have to go pee, because that's what came to my brain in that second, right? Which was true, but it was like, hey, he can handle that. We're on a good, this is age appropriate, and we're given that information. He said, "Okay, Dad." And then he was talking about Buzz Lightyear in the next 30 seconds. I mean, he just went right off. But creating a safe place where those questions can happen at any time, and we're ready to respond with some sort of truthful information. And I always say, start with what's positive and good about sexuality. Even if you're seeing a negative experience, start with, God made this as such a wonderful gift. It's good and it's from God is a great premise to always start with about our bodies and about sexuality.
I'm glad you shared about the terminology as well, because I had heard somewhere that when there are situations where there are predators involved and they are looking for targets, if children actually know the name of their anatomy, it indicates that they have involved guardians, people that are talking to them on a regular basis. And that's actually, it actually pushes a lot of times the predators away, because they're aware that people are super involved in the child's life. So it's like a secondary benefit to that, besides just eliminating the shame and creating safety within your home and within their bodies as well.
And that's a whole part of education that we talk about in the book. And it's really tricky people, not necessarily stranger danger any longer. It's typically a family member or someone that the family knows. And so just educating your kid about boundaries, about when it's appropriate for you to touch your privates, where and when you would do that. And if someone else did, why that wouldn't be right, or you touching someone else. And so all that's kind of a framework that we kind of give in the book.
Oh, good.
If I could, when you mentioned number 4, foster connection, I almost got a little emotional hearing you talk about that, because I think what emotions hit me in the moment as you talked about that was how incredibly empty, lonely, soul crushing the behavior felt. And so it was I might get emotional talking about it.
I feel it too, Patrick. I got a little goosebumps here, but like, if somebody knew Rodney or Patrick in this part of our life, would they still love us? And so again, the more we can create safety by our own vulnerability as parents, appropriate vulnerability, and letting them know it's okay to make mistakes. That's a part of learning.
Right.
And just creating that safety. And so I whatever your story is, Patrick, my heart goes out to young Patrick, who didn't really have those people that could wrap their arms around you and say, buddy, me too. Come on, let's learn and grow from this,
Yeah, it's okay. It's going to be all right.
It's okay. Yeah. Tracy can take the last 5.
Well, I just want to say our approach to the book was more from a family systems, kind of the big picture. And a lot of times parents are looking for just that straight talk and the exact verbiage, because none of us really feel comfortable with the verbiage, right? How do I answer the question? Or if they don't ask, or what do I say?
Right.
What if I say it wrong? All that. And or we're concerned too, because we don't realize they don't have sexualized minds, and it's okay for us to talk about things in small doses and allow them to ask questions. And how do we do that and not answer beyond what they're asking? So we do talk about that in the book, but as you can kind of see from the first few, we kind of build on that. If you're not healthy yourself, how do you help your kids, right? And working on your own health doesn't mean you get it all fixed. All your problems are gone away. But our family has this keep growing kind of mindset. And I feel like that's one thing that Rodney and I really tried to do well, is model that we make mistakes and we're going to keep growing. So I think our kids are well aware of that, and they do that in their own lives. And so
I want to add one thing real quick.
Yeah.
So Patrick, because you bought Foster Connection, I think this is where culture really gets confused. We think our greatest human need is sexuality. That's why everything is so sexualized in our culture. And somehow if I change, fix, identify, blah, 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 all my problems will be gone, right? And so that's the sadness of our culture. Our greatest need is that connection. And you can have intimate connection. I tell people I have a lot of female intimate connections, but only one is sexual. That's Tracy. But I'm very intimate with my mom or my sister or my daughter, but it's not sexual. And then I say I have a ton of intimate male relationships. And they go, oh, no, Rodney, you're kidding me. You're messed up more than we thought. And I go, they're intimate, but they're not sexual, because our greatest need is to be deeply connected with one another. And so just understanding that, I think, is such a big thing. When I see you, you can say to your kids, I see you, I know you, oh, thank you for sharing. And that is our greatest need. Am I enough? And am I loved who I am? And so anyway, that just came to me. So I just wanted to throw that in.
Very true. And so just going back to pursuing personal health, and then we talk about educating yourself, right? So you've talked about it either, with your spouse, or if you're a single parent, you have someone else to talk about the language and what you want to get across. That just helps so much more when we have the language, and we're not just like frozen in that, and then practicing the communication like Rodney talked about. Fostering connection and be ready at any time. And then building on that, we talk about welcoming questions. And that's kind of setting up that it's comfortable to ask questions. It's okay. That doesn't mean we get them all perfectly right. We're prepared for everything. It can involve going back to them going, I didn't really have an answer to that, but here's what I think. Or it's just keeping that dialogue open at a appropriate level. And we have a friend who shared with her young daughter, she was asking some questions that involved her sexual history, and she shared a small part of it. And then the daughter asked her another question, and she said, we're going to come back to this conversation when you get a little older, but I would love to have that conversation with you. And I just thought that was so wise as a mom, because she was trying to just give her the piece she needed, but she left her with, it wasn't a bad question, it was welcomed, but we're going to come back to it. We don't have to unload everything all at once. So it's creating that environment, and we give some specifics on that. Train, not shame or punish. So that's kind of having a mindset of, and I love just starting with thinking in my mind, is this a training opportunity? Rather than maybe how we grew up, where the culture was more like punishment, we need a punishment for this right now. Is like, there's a lot of things we just don't know, or we do them because we're curious or because our friends did. And we really do need more of training at that moment than we need a big punishment. Like, you're losing your cell phone for the summer. It's not usually helpful. And so there's ways of working with our kids to say this is a training moment, and definitely knowing whether our language has shaming words in it for them. And sometimes we don't even realize it until we're kind of like, oh, what am I saying? And how does that come across to that young mind?
And in the digital age where kids, all have iPhones, right? And tablets and this and that. So being the safe parent where they say, hey, Dad, I saw this on my phone, or Mom, I saw this on my phone like you said I would. And so now you're the safe person, and they know that you're going to just help train them. They're not going to get punished because you've talked to them about nudity and when it's appropriate in the shower, in the bathroom, when it's not appropriate on social media or in the front yard. You know what I mean? But they're just learning about these things, and you've given them some framework. And again, they see you as the safest person in that.
Our last 3 principles are focus on growth, not perfection. We talked a little bit about that already. So if you grew up where you had a perfectionistic kind of viewpoint, that's your personality or the home you grew up in, it's just kind of taking a look at that. In our family is what our child is receiving, not just our words, but what they're experiencing is that this is a home where mistakes are expected because that's a part of growing in life, right? And we're still teaching and modeling and helping them make good decisions, but we will make mistakes at whatever level. Yeah. And Mom and Dad are there. We're in your corner. We're growing too. So it's like, I love that when our kids start to realize that their parents are other humans also, and not just these people that have it all figured out, like when they're little. It's kind of nice when they're little and they think you're a genius, but also when they realize that you're in a growth pattern too. And when Mom and Dad are able to say, hey, we've gone to counseling, or Mom and Dad are getting support for this area of our lives right now. And they learn like, oh, growth is a piece and a part of life that our family takes on as a value. So I think that one's really important.
A little 5-year-old boy asked his dad, he said, Daddy, do you think Jesus ever made any mistakes when he was young? Now that's a great question, right? Mm-hmm. And the dad said, well, son, that's a great question. And then he said, what do you think? Which is always a great way to respond when kids ask you, what do you think? It gives you about 30 seconds to think about what you might say, And the kid thought for a second and he said, well, Daddy, if Jesus never made any mistakes, how did he learn anything? Now, I don't want to bust your bubble of the divine, but I want to just say this. Not all mistakes are sin. Some of it's just part of our learning. Jesus didn't say to his mom, Mary, hey, don't worry about potty training. I know I'm only 3, but I'm the Son of God. You'll never have to change a soiled diaper, right? Or maybe Patrick, when he was working in the carpenter shop with his dad, Joseph said, hey, Jesus, come here. See this table? It's not, listen, Jesus, measure twice, cut once. You know what I mean? Like maybe Joseph was thinking, Jesus, you should be a minister because you don't got this skill set. This is not what you're called to do, So just, if you could just take that mindset, and here's the deal, then you can catch things when they're problems before they become hidden patterns in the life of our kids. And a problem is easier to deal with than a pattern that you know nothing about. So creating that safety where we learn when mistakes are made. Here we grow again, as one of my friends says, and that's just a beautiful mindset to have a home where we're not shaming, we're just focusing on growing and learning.
I like that, catching it when it's a problem, not a pattern. That's a quotable. That's a good one. Yeah.
Our last 2 principles, keep modeling and never turn away. I think one of the things we like to talk about in modeling, well, of course, we all know that's an important thing. Our kids mimic us, but our kids don't always necessarily, I think I saw something funny the other day where they're like, I model cleaning the house every day and my kids aren't cleaning the house. And I was like, yes, not everything we model, they're going to pick up on. And so that's an important piece is, yes, they are picking up on values and they will, but that doesn't mean that our children, as they become young adults, not all kids will do everything that their parents modeled, and they're going to sometimes make their own choices, good ones and mistakes, right? And so that never turn away is that piece of we're in this to walk along. We don't cut you off, and that would be shaming, right? And then, that works to some extent, but it's not very healthy. But how do we walk alongside our kids, even if they have different values? We definitely see that in our culture right now. There are a lot of parents, a lot of Christian parents who are experiencing their kids choosing different things than they trained them in or modeled for them. And that can feel really discouraging. But we really talk a lot about one of the things also that we like to talk about is they're listening to how you talk about other people as well, whether it's your neighbor kid that made a mistake or someone in church or them, right? They look at, what do my parents say about that? And do they say, yeah, you know what, I've made mistakes and I'm still growing? And, you know, is it caring or is it gossip? And I think that's a good thing to think about and not everybody approaches it that way, but we can sometimes use shaming words in front of our kids about other people. So we like to say that model too, how you approach other people, their values, and when their values are different than you, how do you love them well? And then with your children, whatever the choices that they make are, how do you support them well?
Yeah. And, you know, Patrick, I can so identify with you, like about not doing parenting perfect, right? And the rest of the world can identify with us as well, because none of us do. The only perfect parent were God, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, right? And they had two kids, Adam and Eve. And if anybody was going to grow kids God's way, you think it would have been God. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And those two kids struggled, right? Mm-hmm. So we got to step back and say, wait a minute. But Traci has always affirmed this, and I think it's kind of why we're sitting here today. Wasn't because Rodney had it all together. I didn't. But just trying to embrace humility in front of our kids. You know, humility looks good on everything. And we even say to our kids, even though we're authors, we work in this line of, hey, whatever was healthy in mom and I's life and marriage and our family of origin, take that with you into your relationship and your family. But our dysfunction, leave here with us. You don't have to take the traits of Rodney Wright that aren't really that healthy, not only in sexuality, but in any arena of our life. Find a better way and keep growing in this. And so I think one of the best things that we can model to our kids as we become tribal elders, you know, gray hair, no hair, or you color your hair once a month, tribal elders, you know, is humility, that we're going to be learning, growing, be vulnerable about our mistakes. And I think that's what the church needs to see, is the older generation showing up, owning their story, being vulnerable, and giving a pathway to follow. And so if we keep growing, and I think Dr. Ted Roberts, so many people in this world have owned and have given back, and you guys are on that same part of this big same movement, that you're modeling some beautiful things by continuing to grow and look at where your kid has come out now. You talk about, Patrick, which is really exciting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know, it always hits me when we talk about paths to healing or correct ways to talk to your kids, or how to approach your wife after she's found out this. You know, there are usually the amount of details that are related to put this blocker on or do this are very, very small. It's like 1% to 2%. What is always talked about, and you all highlighted it as well in your 10 principles, is how to live as a healthy human, how to be open. And so that it's I think a lot of folks will always think, I think they're surprised when they come into this healing journey and they discover it's not necessarily about the blocker, or not having internet on your phone. It's about being able to communicate and empathize and be open and feel all of these different things. And it's, it hasn't surprised me yet. Nobody's come up with a new, not your stuff is very, very exportable, but it's always just about healing. It's about, being a human.
And healing from the inside and making choices because you see your own worth and value. You have a healthier way to see sexuality. Mm-hmm. And now you know how to, manage. And that's part of communication. We talk about not using so much Christian language. Like, back in my day, it was Christian friends, Christian music, Christian tacos, Christian lawnmowers, everything was either Christian or secular. You know what I'm saying? That was like the mindset. Traci and I just have Christian sex only now. It's like those frameworks don't really work. So I like language like what's healthy and unhealthy about human sexuality. We can interject our values. And then how do we manage or mismanage this? Just like our money or our time. Sexuality is a management issue, whether single or married. It's a lifelong we learn to steward, just like finances. Just like Dave Ramsey's teaching people how to steward this better in money, we're trying to teach people how to steward this better in just human sexuality. And if you start young when you're single, boy, that brings a lot of health into moving forward and communicating.
Yeah. And you mentioned a lot. communication and connection and empathy has been like a big theme because, we're trying to avoid shame, which often plays into the negative patterns and the negative cycles a lot. I'm curious, as it would obviously be like the optimal scenario for us to come from a healthy place and a healthy perspective when we're talking to our kids, and we've never had any issues with it, and we never had any problems with it growing up, or none of the negative communication from the church growing up, or anything like that affected us as adults, right? But most of the time, that's not the reality. And a lot of what we see is couples maybe finding this dysfunction and this lack of health in this area after their kids are born. Maybe they're in, like in our situation, Keegan was in high school. And then, maybe we had tried to do things prior, and then you're trying to sort of almost catch up. And it's like, I don't want to pass on this dysfunction to him. And we feel like it's too late, right? So what are your thoughts on, when that happens, it's like you're balancing your own learning, your own recovery, your own marriage reconciliation, all of these things that are really hard for you in your life, and trying to grapple with your thought processes around this, while also turning and trying to offer the best, healthiest version to your kids. So what are your thoughts around maybe balancing those, or maybe the answer is like getting help for that, or, what are your thoughts around that?
Well, put your own oxygen on first, then assist your children in the airplane when it's going down.
I love
so that whole piece of like, if I don't know how to love Rodney well, then I really can't love Traci well, or I can't even love and help my kids well. So sometimes even just saying to kids, hey, I'm going to my recovery group tonight. I'm going to my Pure Desire, SA, AA, whatever, or Mom and I are going to be going to our counselor again today. We're working on our becoming healthier. You're at least you're modeling, or hey, sexuality. I didn't really know how to process any of that, or no one ever explained masturbation to me, which, by the way, on the chapter on focus on growth, not perfection, I write a lot about masturbation from a lot of different perspectives, because I think that's a hard subject to talk about. Yeah. And I always say to the kids, well, ask your mom and dad, how did they navigate that? Dad, Mom, how did you navigate masturbation? Mm-hmm. Parents are like,
oh, look, it's time for dinner.
My way. Yeah, exactly. But the reason I do that is because that's such another hard subject to ever talk about. Mm-hmm. That because I thought that all of the flesh in the scriptures meant my physical body is evil. And that's not what it's referring to. There's nothing evil or wrong about your body and your anatomy. That's how God made you. And so just getting a positive perspective on that, and then the pitfalls of where this can be problematic and challenging. And but it's important that parents really begin to think through how we educate about that. But helping yourself first, and then just, trying to do the best you can to lead, just like you're learning, lead your kids to resources that they can learn. Hey, I have this podcast, this book, this is an interesting thought. I think that's that's that modeling piece about, I don't know it all either. I'm just learning, but reinforcing the kids of your love for them. And this issue isn't about you. This is about something that dad or mom, either one, has struggled with and didn't let the other one know. And now we're working on being healthier.
Mm-hmm. I think there's that piece of just understanding that recovery is a life thing. It doesn't mean that our intensive counseling and groups and the stress in the relationship and all of that will stay the same as we grow and recover and heal. But when we have that mindset that like we're going to be continuing this growth process, because you know what, this is an advantage that we are digging into what's going on underneath and becoming intimate and connected people. And a person who is healing is better at helping anybody, whether it's, being in relationship with our spouse, with ourselves, whether it's helping our kids, right? As we are healing and that we have that ability to help someone else, or to know, like, how do I want to respond out of my own healing? And one of you was talking at the beginning about how people a lot of times want to go in and fix this and then never talk about it again. And yeah, I've seen that, and I kind of had that in my own life. It's like, let's just not tell people about this because there's a lot of shame involved. And that is one way of doing that. And there are people that can be healthy and they have their group, their support people, and those are who they share it with. But but there's that piece of shame, and our society continues to have that shame around it because we kind of go underground with it sometimes. Mm-hmm. So I think it's that valid piece to think you don't have to share your story like Rodney and I do right away, or you can, but you're taking these steps in this journey, and the more you heal and the more you're around people that, like Rodney will say, he was around people like, I really admire and respect them, and they've been AA or an SA for like 25 years. I don't think low of them, right? Why do I feel so low about myself? And so I think the more that you cross that road, and part of that is sharing your story. Doesn't mean you have to share it with everyone, but there is a lot of shame reduction in being able to share our story in small increments, and it can grow throughout our life in how we perceive that God leads us to share that, or to to be more open about it. But I think the same goes with our kids. Like, we can start with our own healing and look for that wisdom in how, like, oh, we're taking on a recovery life. And there are, at least at some point in their life, probably a good time to be able to share your story with your kids, and getting support about when that is and how to do it. We definitely recommend. But you brought up older kids, and a lot of times we'll hear parents that have a lot of, like, I already made these mistakes, my window is gone, my kid's a teenager and doesn't want to talk to me about anything, or my adult child is angry at me, or has shut me out. And so one of the things that I saw, and I saw Rodney do this a lot with our boys, is just our own vulnerability and his willingness to say, even just thoughts and feelings, like using the thoughts and feelings, wheel or whatever, and just saying, hey, here, it wasn't even always around sexuality, but like, here's where I feel insecure, or I feel like a relationship conflict,
tension or fear
or something,
or whatever it may be.
Fear around finances or something. So as they get into those high school years, I think our vulnerability is probably one of the biggest things that opens them back up, because they are a bit peer focused during that age. And then the young adult, us sharing pieces of our own story in a vulnerable way, I think, is one of the biggest things that opens up our kids to doing that back with us, and maybe is a relief to them, because we know that they, as a teenager and a young adult, are struggling with a lot of their own emotional things.
And Patrick, my dad died 2 years ago at 94, and that generation, vulnerability was not a part of their vocabulary, but I watched him grow, and he kept modeling, and I watched him as an older adult just be vulnerable in so many beautiful ways. And he died as one of my best friends. It's just like so beautiful. Like, I'm thinking, when I'm in my 80s, I want my kids to watch me love their mom more, and show up more, and be present more, and all of those things. Our last principle we talk about is never turn away. It's the chapter of the book that kind of touches my heart, about the parent who has a kid that's struggling, and they feel like, man, we love Jesus, or we're deep people of faith, and my kid just seems to be so wayward in the area of sexual management in an unhealthy way. And I just know my journey. When my mom found out about my issue, she said, dear God, I've been praying for the wrong kid all these years, right? Because I was the kid that stayed in church, loved God, followed the call. But in the story of the lost son, or the prodigal son, there's two lost kids. One just happens to be at home, and one's out of the home, but they're both lost in some sense of the word. So I tell a story about the value ring in the book, that when my daughter, my oldest, turned 16, because I had so much shame around my sexuality, I just felt less than my whole life as a kid growing up, because somehow sexual purity was this highest mark you could ever achieve. And I struggled in that arena and have a lot of negative history. So when my daughter was 16, I took her out on a date, and I went and got her nails painted. That's called a manicure. The hands are a manicure, and the feet are a pedicure. Highly recommend those for every man with their wife. Go get a pedicure, boys. You'll never go back. But anyway, that's free. But then I took her to a shop to get her a ring. We looked at a bunch of rings. We found a ring, and the guy said, Mr. Wright, that ring costs $10,000. And I said, oh, Whitney, we're so close. That doesn't match your eyes, but let's keep looking. We're so close, So I found a ring, Patrick, in the hundreds, not the thousands, that matched my budget a little bit better. I got her this ring. And I said, Whitney, this is not a promise ring or a purity ring. You don't have to promise us that you won't have sex before marriage. And I wouldn't give you a ring that says, promise me you'll never lie, promise me you'll never cheat, promise me you'll never steal, right? I said, honey, you don't have enough fingers and I don't have enough rings for you to make all these external promises. This is what we call a value ring. And this is a ring that says your worth and value will never change in our eyes, regardless of your behavior. You will always be our beloved daughter. And you will make mistakes because you're human. And I don't know what areas you will make mistakes, but I want you to make decisions based on knowing your worth and your value. So as you look at this ring, just know that we will never turn from you. And whatever happens, we'll be in your corner cheering you on. And I said, this ring is not about your promise to us. This is our promise to you. We will always love you, always have your back, and always be there for you. And so for me, because I had so much shame, I wanted my kids to try to understand their worth and value isn't based on making mistakes or don't shame the family, but it is, this family is going to pursue you. And that's just my deep conviction of the heart of God. The psalmist says his love endures forever, 39 times. Paul says even death can't stop the love of God. So I just say, stick that in your pipe and smoke it for a while. I mean, I think we don't even understand the love of God for us and the heart that pursues us. So to the parent who feels like he didn't do enough, or maybe the adult who's come to faith, or just the adult that listens that maybe isn't anywhere on their faith journey, but just says, I'm so messed up. There's a ring. And the story of the prodigal son, he hugged his son when he returned and he said, hey, get shoes, get a robe, and hey, go get that ring, And he said, son, even though you weren't choosing me, I was still choosing you. And this is my heart about God's love and his redemptive work for humanity, especially in the area of sexual brokenness. If I could, I would give every young person in this world a ring and let them know their worth and value, as a premise to start understanding the divine and his desire to help us be healthy.
That's a really, really beautiful story and really beautiful visual for people. So thank you so much for sharing that. And as you were talking, what came to mind for me is I'm thinking about churches, right? And I'm thinking about how so much of what you guys have shared in terms of parenting is exactly how churches can also help in this area by leading by example, by being healthy, by talking about it more, by getting rid of shame, by connecting to the people in the church. And I love what you just shared, because imagine if instead of purity culture 30 years ago, we would have had this movement of you are so valuable.
Yeah.
And it's such a different message to give to girls, to give to boys, to talk about their bodies, to talk about their sexuality, to talk about their worth in Christ and their worth as a human being just for existing.
Exactly.
And that's such a powerful thing, I think, to impart on people.
Yeah. Yeah, my boys didn't want rings, but I tried to do, or manicures, but I tried to communicate the message as best I could. I heard one dad say, my sons and I are going to go get matching tattoos.
There you go.
That are about our family crest or something. And I just thought that, hey, whatever it is, but it's a statement that says you'll always be one of us. And I even said to my kids, if you're on death row, I'll be the parent crying on the other side of the glass saying, that's my daughter, that's my son. And none of them are on death row. And so that's good. But to the parent who, whether it's transgender, LGBTQ, just not choosing a value or seeing different values in any arena, please don't turn from your kid. Please pursue them. And love just means you have their best interests. And that's that's a whole nother podcast about healthy boundaries and about respect. But love does never fail, the scripture says. So whatever you do, don't stop loving them. I think in doing that, you'll violate the law of Christ if you stop loving.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for taking your time today and for sharing this and for all of the work that you do with individuals and couples and with the book and just sharing with families how to be healthier and work through recovery and communicate this difficult topic. Is there anything else that you feel like you would like to share with our listeners before we leave today?
I would say that the good news is that the training that we've done in churches is coming out in a digital format.
Oh, how exciting.
September. during the Pure Desire Summit that will be in Portland, Oregon in September.
Wonderful.
In connection with the Barna training. So the Barna study that was done, we're going to have a couple of different resources that will be launched at that time. One of them will be this digital training with a lot of experts that will kind of come and be voices on these 10 principles as well. So churches can get this and they can start educating and let this be because we learn better in community. Communal learning is the best. What would your parents do? What was good? What was not good? So that's great. Churches can really start the education because we think that's being really proactive.
Yes.
And that's a place to start. We're fighting for my grandkids and my great grandkids now, And then second of all, there's a youth pastor resource where there'll be like 18 little videos made where youth pastors can get good information to know how to communicate on our Pure Desire team. That'll be launched as well. So I just appreciate that starting younger, getting upstream, so to speak, and redirecting the river and not letting porn be the sex educator of our kids. Mom and dad, you got what it takes. You really do. And you don't have to be the expert, just know some experts.
I love that. I'm excited that there's resources for communicating and resources for churches. That's great. And that's coming out is that September time?
Yeah, it'll be released on hopefully September 22nd at our summit in Portland.
Awesome.
And so we're really excited about it and churches can launch on because we got to course correct and we can't be silent as a church or a family system. We got to course correct. And if we don't, we're just selling hell insurance. Hey, say this prayer so God doesn't send you to hell. And then we're living in our own hell of sexual addiction because we don't know how to integrate our faith in these other areas of our trauma, our emotions, our sexuality. So we need a healthier conversation.
And will those primarily be available on the Pure Desire website?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
We'll make sure to have those links. We talk about Pure Desire a lot. We talk about Conquer a lot. We often have the link in our show notes, but we'll make sure to have that there. We'll also make sure to link to your book. Is there any other place that people can connect with you? Do you have social media or is Pure Desire website the best for that?
I'll give you my cell number, but Trace doesn't like me to do that. But yeah, it's printed in the back of my book anyway.
Yeah,
so
I'll call Rodney when you finish reading the book and talk about it all you.
Right. Oh, that's great. That's so wonderful. Well, thank you.
Mainly Pure Desire.
Pure Desire.
Where both of us work through there and resources and helping others and.
Again, we love, like you guys, we love being a part of just a lot of different voices out there and helping as many ways as we can. So Pure Desire has wonderful group material for men and women and good clinicians and just they're a great resource. And so, thank you guys for letting us share our voice and be a part of this today.
Absolutely.
And I was just thinking when you asked that question that there are just so many people that come to these podcasts and feel so alone and discouraged and, whether it's a couple, a parent, a single person, you can just feel alone. So even though we've spent a lot of years doing this, there's still trauma and things that come into your life that you still have to navigate and you can't fix everything. Sometimes we're in the middle of the unresolved, right? And to be able to not do that alone, to me, that is the most powerful thing. Whatever you're experiencing and whatever your next step is, to just know I can't do this alone. And when I find those safe people, the recovery world is, to me, is a really big part of that because we're just being real about what's going on. And sometimes that's hard to do. But recovery has a way of helping you get a little more real. And so to be able to enter in that world with others and find your people that you can be really honest and vulnerable with.
Absolutely.
And I have 13 other thoughts I want to say and share right now, but I'm going to show maturity and restraint and look forward to coming back on and having
3 more episodes coming soon.
Right.
We can't wait. Thank you so much for being with us today. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you guys. And thank you for just owning your story and writing a brave new ending. And if I were your kid, I'd be proud of both of you. I'd say, Mom and Dad, way to go. Way to go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Woohoo! If you're listening to this, it means you've made it through an entire episode. Part of recovery is spending time engaging in healing and self-growth activities. We are thankful that you chose our podcast to be one of those activities today. Make sure you reward yourself for that accomplishment. If you've enjoyed this episode or this podcast, we would love to hear from you. Please take just a few moments to leave a rating and review, letting us know your experience with Recover You. We not only love hearing how these episodes are helpful, but ratings and reviews help others just like you who are searching for recovery information and support find the podcast too. We can't wait to hear from you. See you next week.